My mission is to impact the hearts and minds of women, helping them change their stories and empowering them to love themselves, their bodies, and their lives.
What is up, everybody? Welcome to the Change Your Story podcast. I'm Hannah Dawson, your host and transformation coach. I'm a certified personal trainer, nutritionist, mindset coach, writer, speaker, and creator of the Fit Club Babes app, and I am here to help you transform your life. While I love teaching all things nutrition and fitness, and trust me, you'll get lots of that on here, my true passion lies in the power of mindset and self-relationship. I know firsthand how powerful a mindset shift can be. It has profoundly impacted not only my health and fitness journey, but also my relationship with myself, and it can do the same for you too. Many women believe as we age, we lose our beauty, body, and health, but that's not true. You can feel and look amazing and get better with age, and I'm going to show you how. Are you ready to change your story? Let's flip the script one thought at a time. What is up, you guys? Welcome back to the Change Your Story podcast today. Today is the first episode of 5, I believe. It could be 4 or it could be 3. We're going to see how long these episodes go. I don't want them to be too long, so I decided to break my story up for you. So I'm hoping they're going to be around 30 minutes maximum. I wasn't sure if doing my whole story and if it took almost 2 hours someone would be able to listen to that, and then if they couldn't finish it all, how they would get back to where they were first listening to. So I just thought I would break it up for you. So my only ask is that if this podcast brings value to you, if my story has somehow helped you, or it could help people, loved ones or family members or friends of friends that you may know, my only ask is that you share these episodes with them, because my mission is to impact the hearts and minds of women, of people all around the world by sharing my story, in hopes of showing you that you can absolutely change your story. Something that has been so powerful in the last few years of my life has been this understanding, and is that the story you believe will become the life that you lead. And for years, I believed I wasn't enough. That belief shaped everything. It shaped how I saw myself, the choices I made, and the path that I walked. I grew up surrounded by abuse and addiction and chaos. By the time I was a teenager, I was using food to numb my pain, hating my body, and struggling to find my place in the world. At age 18, I thought running away to Vancouver would solve everything, and that I could leave the pain behind to create the life I dreamed of. Instead, I ran headfirst into everything I feared most: addiction, toxic relationships, and a world that swallowed me whole. Within a year, I was living a life I never imagined, working in brothels, surrounded by drugs and destruction, wondering how I had ever gotten here. But something inside me refused to give up. I started over, leaving that life behind and rebuilding from the ground up. I found faith, fitness, and courage to dream again. I built a life I once only imagined, a family, a career of helping women, and a sense of purpose. On the outside, I had everything, but deep down, I still felt something was missing. I realized I had spent my entire life chasing worth and validation, but I had never stopped to love and accept myself. This is the story of how I changed everything, not by running, but by facing myself. It's about rewriting the beliefs that kept me stuck, healing from the inside out, and finding the strength to create the life I truly wanted. My story might sound extreme, but it's proof that no matter where you've been, it's never too late to change the story you believe and the life that you will lead. Are you ready to rewrite your story? Before we begin, I have a special message for you. Yes, you listening. You know, I feel you. I see you. I hear you, and I get it. And I want you to know that you've come to the right place. The story I'm about to share isn't just my story. It was never meant to be kept hidden or secret because it was meant for you, for this very moment. I believe that everything I have been through and how I made it out is a map, one that can show you the way out of whatever that you are going through right now. My hope, as I open up my story in all its rawness and realness, is that it can be a light in your darkness, a guide to help you take those first steps towards healing. My prayer is that you'll open up your heart and your mind to hear what love and truth have been trying to tell you for so long. You may not have been ready before, but maybe now, together, we can let those walls down. Because right here, right now, you are safe. This is a safe place just to be, to hear what you need to hear, to feel what you need to feel. And one day, I believe your story will become a map for someone else, just like I'm sharing mine now. You'll be the light that leads someone else out of their darkness. So let me say this as clearly as I can, okay? You are enough. You are not too far gone. You are not too broken. You are not too damaged. You are not too young. You are not too old. And there is no mistake you've made, no pain you've endured that can keep love from transforming your story for greater glory. And when you are ready, grab your coffee, grab your tea, maybe a box of tissue, and let's sit together. And let me share with you the most vulnerable parts of my heart, because this is where healing begins. And together we'll take the first steps towards rewriting your story, one chapter at a time. You are not alone, and you are so deeply loved. Let's begin. The story we don't choose. One thing that we all have in common is this, is that we don't get to choose who starts our story. We don't get to choose our beginning, and the environments that we grow up in do shape us, do impact us. Just as you learn the language of your family, literally the language, whether that's English, whether that's French, Spanish, you learn that language, but that's not all that you learn. You learn belief systems, you learn patterns, you learn habits, you learn cycles that are generational unless they have been broken. You learn faith, religion, whatever it is, you will learn what you grow up in that environment. But here's the thing that I have learned, and that is so powerful, is that the story that will have the greatest impact in your life is the one that you tell yourself about yourself. And for so long, you guys, I let the story of my childhood, the one I didn't choose, define me. But I have learned this, that changing your story isn't about changing who you are. It's about changing the story that keeps you from who you are. And it's so cool sitting here with you guys sharing my story. And I'll start off my childhood with this story. And maybe you guys have heard this before, but I call it the Sears Wish catalog. My grandparents' place was a safe haven for me. They were probably the most stable people in my life. My grandpa was my father figure. I didn't really have a father figure in my life that was consistent and constant, but he was. And my grandma was kind of the mother figure in my life because my mom wasn't always around in my life. So they took care of me and my brother a lot of the time, but they had this beautiful home right on a lake. Their house was kind of tucked into a little bay area of the lake that made like a pond and then went out to the lake. So they had this beautiful red bungalow house with this huge property and a walkout basement. But in their basement, they had this wood stove burning fireplace. And so when you'd walk into their house, it would smell like baked bread, Irish Spring soap. Have you ever smelled that Irish Spring bar soap? That's what it would smell like. And firewood. So like a fire burning stove. Those are the smells that transcend me back to that time in my grandma's house. That's what her house smelled like. She always would be making homemade food, healthy food, would always have the wood stove burning, especially in the winter, not so much in the summer. And my grandpa used to use this bar spring soap that is just so vivid in my memory. I can smell all of those smells right now. So I would go down to the basement. And back then, we didn't have computers or anything like that. We had like catalogs. And so I remember the Sears Wish catalog. Maybe you guys remember that. Maybe I'm showing my age. I don't know. But we had the Sears Wish catalog. And so it was the Wish catalog that would come around Christmas time and would have so much in it. It was really thick and big. And I remember sitting in front of that fireplace with the chair, sitting on a chair in front of the fireplace, keeping warm. And I would sit with that catalog and I would go through that catalog, and I wasn't picking out the toys like most kids would. You guys, I was picking out my life. I would do this for hours and days after days. I mean, I think my grandma wasn't sure if things were a little bit kooky in my head because I would sit there for hours just staring at this catalog, and she didn't know that I was like literally manifesting the life I have now. Literally, my house was built from a Sears catalog, not to the full extent, but I was practicing it and I didn't even know what I was. And maybe at the time, I was escaping some of the trauma, some of the abuse, some of the things that I was going through. I was like 5 at the time, and I just remember going through the Sears catalog, and I would pick out the husband and the wife, the prettiest ones, the most good-looking ones, of course, and then all of the kids from like the teens to the children to the babies, and then I would go and pick out all their clothes, and then I would go and pick out all the accessories, and then I'd go pick out the lawnmower and the drapes and the bedding, and I mean everything that you could buy in the Sears catalog I had in my house. All right, and I would do this over and over and over again, and I would just dream of this life that I wanted. I always wondered what it would be like to have two parents that were always there. I didn't have that. Like I said, I didn't have a father figure in my life. It was my grandpa, but I had people in my life that kind of like modeled that for me. So my mom's sister. So my mom is the second oldest of 4. So there's the oldest, which is my auntie, and then there's my mom, and then she has 2 younger brothers. I'll try not to use names in here just because for privacy. And so my mom's oldest sister, she had 4 boys and never had any girls. So she really just spoiled me and just really loved me. And they, my auntie, they had a stable life. And so I kind of seen that in their marriage. They had a good marriage. They had 4 boys, and she was just always there for her kids. And I just always remember, wanting to be like my auntie. I'll be like her. And I couldn't wait to be a mom, you guys. I couldn't wait to be a mom and have babies. And oh, don't you know, I wanted boobs so bad. I have no idea why. I was always boy crazy, and I always wanted boobs from the time I was a little girl. I was the girl chasing the boys in kindergarten class, trying to kiss them. That's just who I was. It's just, I was that girl, and I wanted to have a family, and it's just something I always wanted from the time I was really little. And so this year's catalog kind of was my escape. It was my light. It was my way of building this dream that I had of the family I would have and the way I was going to be with my children and my girls and everything. They would always have everything. And I just remember this was so deeply in my heart. It was such an ache. It was such a deep longing, that I still have never got to experience. It's something that I have no idea what it's like to have biological parents that care for you and that you can depend on, and that, if your tire goes flat, they're there for you, or if you need help, they're there for you. I will say, and I don't want to get too far into, I want to stay on topic, is that I have amazing people in my life now. And my mother-in-law, my husband's mom, has been that figure in my life, and she's amazing. And so back to this story, so I had this idea in my mind of what I wanted, and it was to be a mom, and it was to create this life that I didn't have as a little girl. And so to just give you some context, my mom was one of four. She was the second oldest. And, not going into too much detail because I don't know the stories, but the reason I'm sharing is things are generational, ladies. Things are cycles. And so my grandpa really battled addiction. He battled alcoholism. I never really witnessed him like that, but my mom did. And so, I'm not sure what her personality was like as a child because after having children, I kind of, I couldn't imagine if I drank, I probably would lose it on my children. Thank God I don't. But, my mom kind of got the brunt of his ugliness when he would drink. And she ended up running away from home when she was 13. I never knew my grandparents like that. They were just so the opposite to me, but this was her story. And so she ran away from home and got addicted to alcohol and drugs and smoking and just, wanted to do things her way and didn't feel loved and had all this hurt and pain. And so she brought that into having children. So I am one of four children with my mom. We all have different dads. I'm the third oldest, or I guess the second youngest, you could say. I have an older sister and an older brother. Again, I'm not using names here. And they both have different dads. And they lived with their dads. Again, I'm not really sure the full story. I know my mom says the dads kept them. I know she was unstable and unfit. So I can see that kind of being as true. What my sister and my brother must have went through feeling abandoned. I can't even imagine what the healing process is for them because I'm not super close with them. But then my mom had me. I was the product of an affair, so she was married. And so I always wondered why I had someone else's last name and why my dad never knew about me. And so she never told my dad about me. And so I was just kind of this secret. Again, all of these things, all of these energies and beliefs were around me, even when I wasn't aware of it, was shaping some of my story and some of these beliefs I had about myself, just the secret, the shame. And so I never met my dad until I was 5 years old. And my dad found out about me from his friend who he was giving heck for not taking care of his daughter. And his friend made a comment, "You have a daughter that you don't even know about." And so my dad said, "What are you talking about?" And so, the the vivid memory I have of meeting my dad was him storming in our house. We lived in this house on an ice cream stand. So there's an ice cream stand on our property, and we had this little red house beside it. Red house, brown house. I'm not sure what color it was now, but I remember it was in Elko. So Elko is between Fernie and Jaffrey or Cranbrook. It's in BC, and so it's like kind of in the middle of nowhere. And I just remember this house because me and Colton always tried to. My little brother always tried to break into the ice cream hut, even though there was no ice cream. But that was the first time my dad came storming in, and I remember, him being so angry, and my mom going, "That's her," and him talking to me, and then that was the last that I seen of my dad. And he already had a family, so he had my half brother, and then my stepmom had her daughter from another marriage. So they had their own family. So he heard about me, was in my life, and before I even, got to kind of understand what was going on, he was out. I actually think, let me rewind because my memories, I actually think that he took me for Christmas when he first found out to introduce me to his family because I remember playing with tons of kids, but that was it. I don't know what was said, and I don't know why he never continued to be in my life. Again, my mom battled addiction really, really bad, was an addict. And so if you know addicts, the behavior can be manipulative or whatever. So I'm not sure why my dad never stayed in my life until later on. So through this period, the same year that I met my dad was also the same year. And I think that's kind of why when, was building this life, like it was kind of like, I guess if I could have a psychologist look at it, I was kind of like escaping. It was kind of a coping mechanism because 5 was also the year I was first sexually abused, and left with somebody for 4 days, and abused at the age of 5, and that really impacted my belief system more than I realized until I got older. It really, I had my innocence stolen from me. And on top of that, I was left with this man for 4 days and 3 nights and nobody to come and get me. It was just me and my little brother. And, the biggest thing that I remember during that time was thinking, I'm going to escape. And like I said, we were in the middle of nowhere. This guy lived in a trailer. He was a trucker. I remember that because we had to go in his big semi truck to go to the liquor store so he could get boozed up again. I remember seeing my uncle, my mom's youngest brother. And he just said, I remember him coming up talking, going, oh, you got Sandra's kids. And I just remember thinking, save me. Like, I wanted to scream, help me. But I didn't. And I don't know why. And again, I was only 5 and my brother was 2. And I wish my uncle would have just took us from this man. But it didn't. And it didn't happen. And that's, we went back with this man. And the last day that I was with him, he didn't spend the night in the bed. You guys, this is very detailed, so I'm sorry if some of this is like needs censor warning or whatever. And I remember thinking, getting up early, waking up, and he wasn't there. It was just my little brother, and thinking, I'm taking my brother and I'm leaving. And the thought of bears or cougars, and this is what I was thinking. It was way less scary than staying with this guy. I did not want this guy. I couldn't even go to the bathroom alone with this guy. This guy was a pedophile. And that's the words now that you would call him. He was a pedophile. And I just wanted to take my little brother and escape. And I remember the faith that I had, or this feeling, this power come over me that I just would run. Like, I didn't care. I was going to take my brother and run. And so we got up and we were trying to sneak out. My little brother was really little, like 2, and he needed to find his stupid toy. I remember thinking, be quiet, be quiet. I don't want to wake him up, because the guy was sleeping on the couch. And the kitchen door was right there, because it was a trailer home, a mobile home. And I went to open the door and he woke up. And just as he woke up, he said, what are you doing? And he had to play like a tree house out in his yard, or a playhouse out in his yard, because he had a little girl with a girlfriend that they had taken off. That's why we were left alone. She was supposed to be watching us, but they got in fights, so we were left with this creep for days. And so I just said, we're going to play in the tree house. And he said, your mom called. And so for days I'd been like, is my mom called? Is my mom called? Is my mom called? No. And finally, as I was going to leave, and this act of like this thing I can't explain coming over me to protect me and my brother, my mom called. And so, he ended up taking us home. And I remember telling my mom, and I remember her standing in the mirror putting makeup on. I remember her clothes. I just remember it so vividly. I remember her vanity, how it looked, and nothing really. But shortly after that, she ended up going to rehab and getting sober. I went to live with my Auntie Susan, and my brother went to live with my grandparents. And so during this time, and it must have not been very long, because I was still in kindergarten. So I was in kindergarten when all this happened, when I met my dad, when I was sexually abused. All of that stuff happened at age 5. And then I went to live with my auntie, and remember going to school there. So I couldn't have been with her that long. And then my mom came to get me once she got out of rehab. But to my surprise, my mom had a new boyfriend with her, and happened to turn into her fiance. They were going to get married. And so they had decided to move to Calgary. And, for the most part, this time in my life, you guys, was the first time I ever experienced my mom sober. So these moments in my childhood were probably the most precious moments with my mom. I loved my mom. My biggest fear was losing my mom. I was so afraid to lose her. I loved her. She was my favorite human being, even though, she always left me, even though she would always make promises. I would always believe her because my hope was that she would want to be my mom and I would be the most important thing in her life. Me and my brother would. And for this time in our life, for this period, she was an amazing mom. We moved to Calgary and then they got married. And then we moved to Dutchess outside of Brooks, Alberta. And the guy she was married to, we took over his parents' farm or lands or whatever, and we lived there, and we went to church, and they went to AA, and I went to school, and it was good for the most part, but it was so fast. I mean, I was 6 when we moved away from when she picked me up and with this man, and then they got married, and then by the time we left him, I was 8. And through that period, they ended up starting to fight. He ended up being very abusive, in the sense of abusive towards me, but also starting to show signs of being like a pedophile too. So, at first it started with he would spank me. And I couldn't stop crying, so he would spank me until I stopped crying. So that would leave me with bruises all over my butt. If I didn't brush my teeth properly or the way he wanted me to, he would hold my face underwater. And so there was just so much fear. And then there went through parts where, my mom stopped sleeping in the bed with him. And I remember this part was so scary for me because, never dealing with the abuse that I had currently went through before my mom met him, right? It was everything didn't get talked about or dealt with. I didn't see counselors or anything. Just got thrust into this new life, which, I think kids are so resilient in just moving on or forgetting it or finding ways to cope. And so, they started to not get along. She started to lie to him. I'm not sure all that went on, but things just started to unravel and fall apart. And then, he would just do really creepy things, not to the full extent of when I was first abused, but perverted. And so he'd always our bedrooms the doors were right across the hallway from each other. So my bed and their bed lying on our beds, we could look into each other's rooms. So our doors were always open. So every time he was home and he wasn't working and I was awake, he would always call me into the bedroom. And I just remember dreading it. But I was so terrified of this man because of just like how he would abuse me when I wouldn't listen or if I would do something that he didn't want, that I was scared he would hurt my mom. So he just did weird things with me and situations. And I don't need to go into detail, but very uncomfortable things. And so, my mom, at the end of this relationship, you can say they got in a huge fight. I don't really remember what happened. I just remember he was on top of her and she was screaming. And I went to my room and she came running into the room and laid in bed with me. And she said, Hannah, she goes, you tell mommy, do you want to leave? And I said, yeah. Like, she goes, if you want to leave, we'll leave. And so we left him while he was at work, and we ended up living in women's shelters for the next year, running from place to place. And then she found out what he was doing and how he was slowly preying on me and doing weird things. And she started to unravel again. So, I think my belief as a child too is I've caused all of this, right? I've caused all of this. I've caused her pain. Something's wrong with me. If I wouldn't have told her to leave, our life would be okay, even if it meant that I was in harm. I remember even just recently kind of going through this and dealing with like, if I didn't have to make that decision and we stayed, that maybe I would have had my mom, right? Because the mom I started to get after that was horrible. She started drinking again. And about this time I was 8 going on 9. So the summer that I turned 9, she had called my dad before I turned 9, the end of the school year. We were staying in Calgary in a women's shelter. and she had called my dad saying that she was going to send me to his house. So the guy that I only met when I was 5 and went for Christmas and met his family for a little bit, now was going there to spend the summer with him in Vancouver where they lived, or in White Rock where they lived, to get to know my dad. And so her drinking was, she thought she was hiding it, but I knew when my mom would be drinking, and so she was drinking when she called him, and then ended up going and staying with him for the summer and coming back. But this time we weren't living in Calgary; we were back in the area that I originally escaped from. So this time we weren't in Elko, we were in Baines Lake. So they're just like these little tiny areas, away from everything, like almost secluded little areas. Anyway, she picked me up from the airport, and she had sunglasses on. She had a new boyfriend now. So she's not with the other guy. She left him. Now she has a new boyfriend. And so this guy, we get in the vehicle, and I remember her taking her sunglasses off and her eyes black. And I just remember thinking, what? I never had really witnessed my mom being totally beaten. I have memories when I was really, really little of this person she was with and hearing her scream. But this was the year that I was going to witness abuse that I have never witnessed before, the kind that you see in movies. This guy was a woman abuser on a whole other level, tried to kill her, would beat the crap out of her. I mean, there was drugs, alcohol involved. We lived in a little trailer park, lived in a mobile trailer. I went to school. I was in grade 3 at the time. And again, my way to cope with this was I would tell elaborate stories at school. And so when you would go into the classroom and like ask how your weekend was, I would start telling these stories of how my dad is this coolest person and he's got me on limousines. And I remember this so much because I remember the teacher getting me to share this story in front of the class. And I remember this little boy that knew him and my mom were party mates, party friends, and so he knew who I was and he knew my story, and he goes, "You're a liar, that's not true." And that teacher, she was such a great teacher. She just confirmed my story and she just let me talk about it. But I remember that was the beginning of making up these elaborate stories in my mind. And these stories of like, I could just make believe my life. Nobody has to know the life that I go back to. And a lot of the time that whole year we'd go back and my mom wouldn't be home because the pub was in town and we lived in Baines Lake. And so if you've been to the mountains, like things are far away. So we took the bus to and from school. And so, we would, a lot of the time we would be alone. And if we weren't alone, then they would be there drinking and he would beat her. I mean, there was a time when he would he grabbed her by the clothes from her pants to the back of her shirt and started slamming her against the ceiling. And it's a trailer, so the ceilings weren't that high. And I remember getting a broomstick and whacking him across the head. Like this was the life that I was living in grade 3. And this just continued. And it got so bad to the point where I remember our neighbors saying, "Hannah, if this guy does this, you come over and get us." And I remember it happening again. This time, I don't want to say names this time. He had broken her leg. He beat her so bad, he broke her leg. She was in a cast and crutches, and they started to fight again. And she went to run away down the steps outside and went to go in the car to drive away. And he got in the car and he just started beating her and there was nothing I could do. I remember running from neighbor, banging on the doors, help, help, help. Finally, I got a neighbor across the street and they opened up and called the police. And by that time he had her in the ditch. And I mean, she's almost dead. If he wouldn't have stopped, she would have been dead. So this was my grade 3 year. And, my mom forgot Easter that year, like just all these things that kids like this. It was a part of my language, a fucked up year. It was a year that you just go from one thing to the next. You don't even have time to process your own trauma of what's going on, that there's so much trauma just being just crazy situations going on. And so that summer I went back to my dad's. This started to become a thing. But this summer when I went back to my dad's, my mom had called and said I wasn't coming home. And I just remember this was like a fear of mine. I remember anxiety so bad. I didn't really know this man and my stepmom. Like I never had a bond with him. This was weird. And to be honest, I had a fear of men. I didn't like men. It doesn't matter if he's my dad. I didn't trust men. They made me feel uncomfortable. So I did find myself kind of more so moving closer towards my stepmom, but I never felt comfortable. I always felt scared. I always felt like I could be thrown out at any moment. Like I had to be a certain way. I had to be a good girl because any behavior would make people stop loving me. They would leave me. I had moved so much, you guys, by this point. I had moved at least a couple times a year, if not every single year, and was in a different school every single year up until this point. And so, I lived with my dad for grade 4. And, I just remember, having to go to school for the first time. And why I'm sharing so much detail with you is because there's so many moments in my life as I look back and share with you, that even though through the darkest times, there's always an angel. There's always some sort of hope. And so grade 4, I just remember looking in that classroom, and I remember I was extremely shy. Okay, this is how shy I was. Rewind, we'll come back to this part. Rewind to living in Calgary in the women's shelters. Again, I got ripped out of my home, right? Running from women's shelter to women's shelter and finally getting put in a school. And I remember sitting in that school, in that classroom, and we were sitting in a circle, and we each had to take turns reading. And it was my turn to read. And my shyness, my insecurity, the way I felt about myself, there's no way I was going to read and feel dumb or feel all of this. It would just validate everything. I literally looked up, put down the book. I ran out of that school. I ran all the way to those apartment buildings, to the women's shelter. And I just remember running. The school called my mom, I believe. But that's how petrified and shy I was. And so fast forward to this grade 4 day, I remember my stepmom bringing me to the classroom. I remember looking in the classroom and seeing, I've never seen that many kids in a classroom, right? I'm from a small town. I never went to big classrooms like that. Like this school had lots of kids, and I thought, nope. And I ran and I hid behind the door. And I remember my stepmom having to literally pry me from behind the door. And I just remember being petrified. But there's this one girl, and she was with her friends. And she was this blonde, like white blonde girl. And I just remember thinking, I wonder if she'll be my friend. And you guys, that was my best friend through all of grade 4. And like I said, there will always be a miracle or angels or something looking over you, even in the darkest moments, even when you're most alone. And I believe that she was placed in my life for a reason, because her mom to this day is someone that I call, my soul mama. She's still in my life. And I can't even explain it, but whenever I would go over to my friend's house, I don't want to use names, the warmth and love and safety I felt, I couldn't explain. More so than my dad and my stepmom. I just felt loved. I just felt safe. And so I would spend weekends there. Almost every single weekend of grade 4, she would be at my house or I would be at her house. I would confide in her, and that was my grade 4 year. And at the end of grade 4, I wanted to move back home. And so, I remember my dad being really sad, because I think, he grew bonded to me and he wanted to keep me there, but he wasn't going to keep me against my will. So, I went back to my mom's. This time she was living in Cranbrook, this time with a new boyfriend. This boyfriend that she had, though, I still call my stepdad to this day. They're not together, but he's a part of my brother's life still. But this man was just, again, another kind of angel in disguise in my life. stability in such a weird, unique way, and you'll hear why soon when I get into kind of my fitness story. But he was such a great guy in so many ways. That's why him and my mom couldn't work out, because she was just so the opposite, just unstable. Like her addiction, she had crazy bad cycle patterns that just couldn't keep anybody in a consistent, healthy relationship with her. But I moved back, and I remember my mom had a whole grow up in the basement. So I went from stability, being a kid, having sleepovers, to now being thrown into this life again. Her sitting me down and going, "Hey, Hannah, if you see me foaming at the mouth, shaking on the ground, call 911." Meaning I didn't understand at the time, but a drug overdose, right? So she was addicted to drugs. So we spent only about half that year with her, and then my grandparents had to come and take us away because it was so bad. So then I lived with my grandma. And then grade 7, I ended up moving with my auntie Susan. So I went from like no stability, no rules, crazy chaos, to an extreme religious household, like church every Sunday. They had 5 boys. I was not allowed to have sleepovers at other people's house. I was not allowed, like, unless it was with our church or like their family. I wasn't allowed to go to other people's houses. Again, just lots of stuff there. But I want to say my aunt and uncle were so amazing for taking me, and it was stability. It was consistency. Even though it was really hard through that time. But again, you guys, I found myself making up stories. And so you're going to hear, I would make up these elaborate stories to almost escape the life. I just remember thinking, these people don't know me. They don't need to know where I come from. And I remember telling this one boy in the class, how my parents had this cool house on the lake and we had all these cool boats. Like, I just remember this, and like, I don't know what my need was for lying about this, but I thought, oh man, if I can make up these stories, like, it just made me feel good, or made me feel cool or accepted, because all these kids had normal lives where their parents were together and they had all these things and lake homes and all these things. And I think a part of me wanted that. And so I pretended, just like that Sears catalog, just like that limousine that my dad sent for me with the hot tub on it. I forgot to say there was a hot tub on the limousine. So I would make up these things. And I remember this boy must have said something to my older cousin. And he goes, and again, he's just a kid too. He doesn't know. He just knows he hears his parents talk about my mom. And he goes, no, her mom doesn't. Her mom has a grow up in the basement and is a drug addict. And I remember he said that to me. And I just remember running out of the classroom. I was so embarrassed and crying, and just shame, all this shame, all this shame that came over me. So the belief, that I had was I wasn't enough. I was yucky. I was all of these things, had such like pivotal moments in becoming a girl. And so, and a teenager. I was in grade 7 at the time. And so I only spent that year with my auntie, and then I wanted to go back with my mom and live with my mom. I loved my mom. I think my biggest fear was losing my mom. I always wanted to be with my mom, and my mom always promised me that she would get better. And so I had always this hope that maybe it's now, maybe it's this year, maybe I can change her. But when she wouldn't, and she would always go back and break promises, I really internalized that. And it really, I found ways to cope with my pain. From the abuse that I experienced as a childhood to now feeling all of this shame and this self-hatred and really rejecting myself. This is when self-rejection became such a belief of mine. I rejected myself. I didn't love who I was. I actually started to hate myself. And this really started to show up in areas of my life with around food. Food was my first drug of choice. It was the first addiction that I ever had. And in this next episode, you guys, I'm going to be sharing, my battle with an eating disorder, and really how fitness, this was the introduction to fitness becoming a safe haven for me. Fitness really anchoring me and really giving me a foundation and hope for something greater in my life that would later on carry me out through my life and be an anchor in my life. And this is where it all started. So I'm excited to share with you that in this next chapter, in this next episode, really how I went from battling, one addiction, which was a disordered eating, body dysmorphia, all these nasty things, to fitness being this haven for me, and really what impact that made in my life. But also was a double-edged sword, and we'll get into that in the next episode. Thank you guys for tuning in. Again, if you know somebody that this will help, please share. Leave your comments, reviews, or you can even email me if you want to share your thoughts or if this resonated with you. I love you all, and I can't wait to share the rest with you on the next episode. Bye for now.